Straight ahead on Law&Crime Daily, prosecutors won't pursue a new death sentence for convicted wife killer Scott Peterson. Victim Lacey Peterson's family saying this process is simply too painful. Jury selection is underway in the Tennessee trial of a father accused of murdering his autistic son and disposing of the body. Why Joseph Daniels' defense says his confession was coerced. The accused Daytona Beach serial killer appears in court as prosecutors prepare 2 death penalty eligible trials for the murders of 4 women. Plus, bombshell testimony in the trial of Robert Durst for the murder of Susan Berman. Are prosecutors successfully tying the murder of the millionaire's best friend to the disappearance of his first wife?
She was extremely frightened that maybe something would happen to her.
Law&Crime Daily covering court cases from coast to coast. Welcome everyone to Law&Crime Daily. I'm Brian Buckmire along with Terry Austin. Prosecutors in California announced they won't be seeking a new death sentence for convicted killer Scott Peterson. Angela Levy is here with this major development.
Brian, this came as a little bit of a surprise. Well, first of all, there is a moratorium on the death penalty in California, but the prosecutor in this case had indicated in the past that she would seek the death penalty yet again. She explained in court documents what has changed.
Months after the California Supreme Court vacated Scott Peterson's death sentence, Stanislaus County District Attorney Birgit Flatiger notified the court she would not seek the death penalty against Scott Peterson at his resentencing. Flatiger wrote, "While the family of Lacey and Connor believe there is no doubt that the defendant is guilty of these crimes, the family has decided this process is simply too painful to endure once again. But it's not been determined whether Peterson will get a new trial."
To my mind, it's all over but the shouting. If there was ever a case that needed to be reversed on the guilt phase, that's the case.
Attorney Mark Garrigus represented Peterson at his trial in 2004. Peterson's attorneys say juror Rochelle Neese engaged in juror misconduct.
She, from the outset, was not following the judge's order that you've got to start all over again and discuss. She came in with an agenda and it was clear.
The trial court will determine whether Neese's behavior was so egregious that Peterson deserves a new trial. Juror Mike Belmessieri said Neese wasn't a driving force in the deliberations.
She didn't in any way influence anyone with her position.
And his feelings on the death sentence issue.
Whether or not he goes to the gas chamber is really, for me at any rate, isn't an issue.
And right now, there are really 3 issues for Scott Peterson. The first being whether or not taxpayers will fund his attorney, whether he gets a public defender or whether a private attorney is paid for by the taxpayers. That's actually what he wants. He wants Pat Harris, who represented him in the past, to now represent him again. And also, we have the issue of when he will be resentenced to life without the possibility of parole. And third, whether or not Scott Peterson gets a new trial. There's been no decision on that just yet. Brian?
Thanks, Angela. Joining us today is legal analyst Dina Dahl and Terry Austin. Dina, clearly a move to spare the victim's family the pain of another trial. Was this the right move, though?
I think it was the right move because they're in California, and right now there's a moratorium, and before then it was very rare for anybody to be put to death under the death penalty. So the fact that the family also didn't want to go through with what would have maybe been a more symbolic death penalty punishment, I think the prosecution took that into consideration when they decided not to seek it again.
Now, Terry, the reason why we're here seems to be a misstep by the trial court. They let Peterson basically go with life without the possibility of parole rather than death sentence. Did the appeals judge get it right, though, for overturning that sentence?
You know what, Brian, I think the appellate court did get it right. Whether or not you agree with the end result, they kept the core conviction for now. And, they are saying that the death sentence really should be overturned because the lower court erred when they dismissed the jurors who responded to the questionnaire that they opposed the death penalty. And I think that the appellate court made the right decision because there's no indication that these jurors weren't going to be fair. There's no indication that they weren't going to follow the law. So the judge should not have summarily dismissed those jurors.
No, Angela, as you described it, it seemed like there's a lot of moving pieces here that has yet to be decided for Peterson. So what's next for his cases coming forward?
Well, really, what's next is that decision on whether or not he will get a public defender or whether or not the taxpayers will be forced to pay for his private attorney, who is Pat Harris. Pat Harris wants to take the case, but he also wants to be paid. And right now, Scott Peterson is indigent and his family says they can't pay. So that decision is going to be made on June 18th. And then there will be another hearing later this month about the issue on whether or not he gets a new trial.
Yeah, pretty common occurrence where an individual, you're guaranteed counsel through the Sixth Amendment. You can get a public defender or a private attorney who's funded by the state, but getting to pick is not something that really happens. Tara, any additional thoughts you think might happen in this Peterson case in terms of who his lawyer gets selected as we go forward?
You know, it's interesting because I never in a million years ever thought that he would even be attempting to be indigent here. But I think that if he gets another lawyer, it's going to have to be someone who is good on appellate issues, because that is the real issue here, whether or not he should have a new trial based on that one juror who everyone is saying was biased and prejudiced. But we'll see at the end of the day.
Now, Angela, do you have some dates for us? I know you said one date earlier about an appeal. When can we expect a decision on whether Scott Peterson gets a new trial?
Well, the later date this month is really to discuss the status of that issue and things like that. So the judge said during the most recent hearing that she hopes to have a decision on whether or not Peterson actually gets a new full-blown trial by the end of 2021.
Thank you, Anjanette, for that, and thank you all for contributing. Now to Idaho, where defense attorneys for the so-called doomsday couple have withdrawn their subpoena for a local reporter. Lori Vallow Daybell and her husband Chad Daybell are charged with murdering Vallow's 2 children. The bodies of J.J. Vallow and Tylee Ryan were found buried on Daybell's property. Lori's case is on hold, pending a mental health competency evaluation, but Chad's attorney previously subpoenaed East Idaho News reporter Nate Eaton to appear in court for a change of venue hearing. The newspaper retained an attorney and learned this past weekend Attorney John Pryor withdrew it. The newspaper called the withdrawal a welcome recognition of the First Amendment. Daybell is scheduled to appear in court for his arraignment on June 9th. Still ahead on Law&Crime Daily, is a serial killer behind multiple murders of women in Florida over decades? But first, how a jury is being selected in the trial of a Tennessee father who confessed to killing his son and then recanted. The no-body murder trial next. Welcome back. Jury selection is underway in the Tennessee trial of a father accused of murdering his 5-year-old son and hiding the body.
He must have locked the door.
Okay.
He got out.
Joseph Ray Daniels called 911 on April 4th, 2018 to report his son as missing. Daniels said his 5-year-old with autism, Joe Clyde Daniels, known as Baby Joe, was last seen the night before.
I did not know where he was gone.
Okay, is he nonverbal or is he verbal?
It's nonverbal.
Nonverbal.
A search was launched for Baby Joe in Dickinson County. State investigators were called in. But 3 days later, those investigators said Daniels confessed to murdering his son.
His exact words was he was bleeding, but he said he did not see blood.
Daniel reportedly said during a 5-hour interrogation that he hit Baby Joey until the boy stopped crying. Daniels described putting the boy in the trunk of his car and leaving his body in a field. Daniels took investigators to that location, but the 5-year-old's body has never been found. Daniel has since recanted. His defense says he suffers from mental health issues and calls his confession coerced.
And you don't have any physical evidence outside the alleged confession that the child was killed or carried anywhere.
Physical evidence. I did not collect any. I am aware of physical evidence related to a shovel, but I'm not aware if that if that's been any information relating to that shovel has been confirmed or not.
Investigators say there was no physical evidence of the child living in the house and said it could have been cleaned before it was searched. Daniels is charged with criminal homicide. The boy's mother, Crystal Daniels, is charged with aggravated child neglect or endangerment. She's also accused of helping to cover up the crime. A judge previously ruled the two would be tried separately. Daniels is the first to stand trial. Jury selection is scheduled for Tuesday and Wednesday. Jurors will be selected from another county and will be sequestered during what is expected to be a one-week trial. Opening statements are set for Thursday. Daniels is being held in jail on a $1 million bond. Let's bring back legal analyst Dina Dahl and Terry Ossing to break down this new trial. Terry, this is a new one for us. So jurors are being bused from a neighboring county and sequestered. How do you think this will affect the trial?
Actually, I think it's a great idea. Judges always have that option, but they don't usually select it. I think picking the jurors from the neighboring county of Hamilton County is a good idea because maybe they don't know much about the case. And busing them back, I think, is also a good idea, and sequestering them, because if they're in a hotel, they can have control as far as what news they see about the case, and there's less of a chance that they will see something that will affect their later deliberations. So I think it's a great idea. One strange thing about this case, the judge is having the court being held in session on Saturdays, which is a little bit odd, but maybe he's doing that because he's decided to keep these jurors in a hotel and he wants the case to proceed as expeditiously as possible.
Yeah, makes sense. See how that plays out. Terry, just to follow up, does the fact that Daniels didn't or couldn't bring officers to his son's body affect the confession? Because they're saying there's not much physical evidence, and we've seen in other trials where the defendant brings them to the body, that's usually used as a way to kind of show you had knowledge about where this person died and how they died. So does it affect the case here?
Yeah, you know what, Brian? If I'm the prosecutor, I would argue that the fact that the defendant did not bring us to the body has no effect on the confession. He's already confessed to killing his child. And, you know, I would even go further to say that the defendant is probably holding out, thinking he can use that information to his advantage, perhaps down the line when he's pleading.
Now, Dina, of course, the prosecution is going to be arguing that, but the defense is going to be saying 5-hour course interrogation that led to no body. The defense's argument seems pretty clear. Do you think that could lead them to reasonable doubt, though, for the end of this trial?
You know, it definitely opens up the door for reasonable doubt because, A, you know, why didn't he lead them to the body? He's in the middle of confession. He's taking them to a location. And then also he said that he put his son in his trunk and there's no video footage of his car leaving that night. So you do have to start to wonder. I mean, we know something happened to this child, but his mother was also in the house that night. You know, was it the father or was it the mother? And that's where it starts to create reasonable doubt. Could he have confessed at the time because he was trying to protect his wife? The fact that you would do this confession and then leave out critical details or lie about critical details within the confession definitely helps the defense in their argument that it was coerced.
All right, we'll see how it plays out. Thank you both. Coming up on Law and Crime Daily, damning testimony against real estate heir Robert Durst, but it's not for the murder he's on trial for. Plus, when and where the so-called Daytona Beach serial killer will stand trial for multiple murders. Find out next. We're back. A suspected serial killer appeared in person in a courtroom in one county to be heard remotely in another as Florida prosecutors work out which of his death penalty eligible trials will go first.
We're here on a status check.
Robert Hayes is accused of murdering Rachel Bay in 2016 by strangling her. The Palm Beach County Sheriff says a rape kit revealed Hayes' DNA.
Had we not done this, we're pretty sure that he would have killed again.
Genetic genealogy solved Bay's murder, and investigators say links Hayes to the murder of 3 more women in Daytona Beach from 2005 to 2006. Those women had been shot to death.
We have been able to take what we believe is a serial killer off the streets.
Hayes has pled not guilty and wrote in previous court documents that he claims investigators withheld cell phone information that showed he was in a different area from the location of the murder. At the same time, a witness allegedly told police he saw Bay alive. Hayes admits to having sex with Rachel Bay that night, but claims he didn't kill her. Prosecutors say Hayes targeted sex workers for years and are seeking the death penalty in both counties.
The murders with which Mr. Hayes has been charged up in Volusia County occurred well before the murder with which he's charged down here. It probably makes sense for us to kind of stay back and allow that case to proceed.
Hayes is scheduled to appear in Volusia County next month for what's known as a Williams hearing. The state is seeking to admit evidence from Bay's case into the murder trials for the first 3 known victims. Here to talk alleged serial killer with us is legal analyst Dina Dahl and co-host Terry Austin. Now, Terry, Williams' hearing is used to admit evidence in other crimes to show motive, intent, or other factors. If the prosecution wins that hearing here, then what next?
You know what? That would be great news for the prosecution. That hearing is based on a Florida case, actually, which says as long as you're not using the information to prove bad character and you're using it to show intent or modus operandi, it's all good. So if the prosecution is able to get this in, I think it's going to be very convincing to the jury.
Now, Dina, they're trying to put them all together. 3 of the victims were shot. The one that Hayes is charged with here was strangled. Will that make it hard for the prosecution to tie it all in together because of different ways of death?
Not necessarily. 10 years lapsed between the first 3 and the last one. And it's not unusual to see some sort of progression if he is indeed a serial killer and how he does the killings. The last one is actually more intimate in that it is a strangulation, which also seems like consistent with maybe how a serial killer might progress in his killings.
Yeah, maybe we'll see some expert talking about the mindset of a serial killer in this case, which would be really interesting. Thank you, Dina. Thank you, Terry. When we come back, Robert Durst turns to look at the jury as prosecutors play testimony from a friend who says the millionaire's missing wife was afraid of him. The alleged ties to the murder of his best friend next. Testimony has resumed in the trial of a real estate heir accused of murdering his best friend to cover up the decades-old disappearance of his first wife. Robert Durst is accused of shooting Susan Berman in the head, execution style, in December 2000. Prosecutors say Berman had information about the disappearance of Durst's first wife, Kathy, in 1982, and threatened to go to the police. The defense says he didn't kill Berman and doesn't know who did. One of Kathy's classmates testified at a pretrial hearing in 2018 that Kathy was afraid her husband would hurt her. Video of that testimony was played in court, so the now doctor didn't have to fly in from New York.
Kathy said that she was very frightened because she thought that her husband might hurt her.
And did she say those words to you?
Yes, she did. She said that there were problems in the marriage, and that things had escalated to the point that she felt unsafe. She said that her husband was capable of violence and told a story to support that.
You sit here today, are you still afraid of Mr. Durst, either directly or indirectly?
Well, I would say less than I was in 1982, but there's some feeling that, I'm state of mind I have the situation that may not be 100% safe.
On cross, the defense asked about Kathy Durst's alleged drug use and suggested that could have explained her behavior back in 1981.
You said she was agitated, she froze up, she appeared to you frightened. Later, when she called you, her voice was shaking, she was talking fast, her demeanor was upset. Are those symptoms that are also common to the use of cocaine?
Some of them talking fast, certainly.
In late 1981, what you described to us, you didn't call the police then. You didn't call anybody then. No. And then when you learned of Kathy's disappearance, again, you did not call the police.
Right.
And the first time that you called the authorities at all was in 2003?
Yes.
All right, back one last time with us is Terry and Dina. Dina, call me crazy, but is this whole Durst trial built on a thin block, arguing that maybe Susan Berman knew about a murder that the prosecution can't prove? Isn't that built-in reasonable doubt right there?
They do have to prove a case within a case, but today's testimony was very helpful because this classmate says that she told him how scared she was of her husband. And the other thing the classmate said was that nobody came to interview him. So it helps show two things. One was that she had a reason to be afraid of her husband. And two, the police didn't do a very good job of investigating the case, which may be why there was never a trial for Robert Durst, which is important for the jury to know why he was never convicted if indeed he did something with his wife.
Yeah, maybe he slipped through the cracks and now this is them just catching up to him. Terry, Bill Mayer, the Durst neighbor in South Salem, testified that Robert Durst didn't stop by for drinks after he dropped Kathy off at the train station the night of her disappearance. Contradicting what Durst was said all along, how does that hurt the defense?
You know, it's interesting. Dina's right. This is a case within a case. And if, in fact, this testimony by Mr. Mayer is believed by the jury, it's really going to show that Robert Durst didn't have an alibi at all. I mean, in fact, if he stopped by for drinks at the mayor's house, then it means he didn't have time to kill and dispose of Kathy's body. And that is, in fact, what Robert Durst, I think, is trying to claim and trying to show here. But I think if the jury believes Mr. Mayer and his wife, they both said the same thing. And she also said she saw a blue light in the basement that night. I think that if the jury believes that, they're not going to believe Durst at all.
All right, we'll see where the jury lays when it comes to all this testimony coming in. Dina and Terry, thank you very much. And thank you for joining us here on Law and Crime Daily. We'll see you next time as we discuss justice in America.